The Iraq War was America's neoconservative war, the first phase of an ambitious plan to use U.S. power to spread freedom and democracy in the Middle East and beyond. But that was then. 5 years on, who's listening to the neocons now? My guest today is a British writer who's made it his mission to bring muscular, moral neoconservatism across the Atlantic. But is this a worldview that can win over Europe? Douglas Murray, welcome to Hardtalk.
Good to be with you.
Would you accept that neoconservatism is fundamentally an American mindset, American ideology?
No, not at all. It's become most famous for its American proponents. We think of neocons as being people around the White House and all this sort of thing involved with the Iraq War, various cliches that have been doing the rounds for some years now.
But going back to its foundation, it was born in America.
The most prominent forefathers of it were American, that's true, but then neocons also looked to non-American figures. There are people like the late French philosopher Jean-François Revel, who's much lauded by neoconservatives, and even Margaret Thatcher gets mention in the annals.
But I suppose I begin this way because I want to ask you whether it is easy to imagine Europe embracing a philosophy which seems more than anything else to be founded on an American view of what is morally superior and also an American might, an American power.
Well, I think on the issue of moral assertion, moral assertiveness, it's true that Europeans aren't all that good at doing that at present. It's quite hard to persuade Europeans that there's anything all that great about themselves, or that indeed there's anything that's good about them which they'd want other people to share in. One of the great things about America, to my mind, is the fact that the American Revolution doesn't stop at, and hasn't stopped at, America's own borders. It's a sort of extraordinary historical one-off, a nation that doesn't say, well, we've got liberty, democracy, freedom here, and that's all right, I'm all right, Jack. They don't say that. They do believe, a lot of Americans believe, that even if they don't forcefully help other people to get there, they should do what they can to ensure that the American ideals of freedom, which I believe are universal ideals of freedom, don't stop just at America's borders.
But you only addressed the first part of my question there, which was about the moral assertiveness and superiority.
Yeah.
But it's also the question of might and power and who has it. And ultimately, the United States from the 50s, when the key sort of founders of philosophy were writing their important works through to the present day, it's America that has the might.
It's true, and it's true that if you're a European and you don't have many armies, it's good to find reasons not to use those armies. You can justify your non-spending on defense by saying that you didn't need it anyway. I think that's a mistake.
Sorry to interrupt, but when you therefore come to propound neoconservatism for Europe, you're essentially saying to Europeans, you have to buy into the notion of tying yourself to Washington and to U.S. military power.
No, you don't have to tie yourself to it by any means. One of the things that I do advocate and would continue to advocate is that Europeans, including Brits, have to step up on military spending. You can't have the situation we currently have with European nations nudging under 2% and boasting when they nudge above 2% of their spending on military power. I think you end up in the situation we're currently in, which is that even in relatively small-scale conflicts like Afghanistan, nations like Holland and Germany find themselves stretched, deeply stretched, in conflicts which, in the universal scale of things, will look fairly small.
You have written that neoconservatism centers on, and I'm quoting, natural right, moral clarity, and exporting what is good in our culture. Natural right, what do you mean by that?
Natural right stands opposite to the prevailing trend of certainly European philosophy, which is relativism. It's the idea that no single thing is better than another. There are just different ways of looking at the world. So if I believe in democracy and freedom and the rule of law, and you don't, you believe in entirely different systems, you believe in authoritarianism and so on, but then we will disagree that that's just another way of looking at things, and who would I be to tell you that dictatorial families or crime-syndicate inherited dictatorships like that of Iraq shouldn't just continue? Who am I to say that? Well, I think there are certain things, and natural right is the normal way of assessing that.
I'm sure you would accept that if I was sitting with a key thinker or politician in the Islamic Republic of Iran right now, they would say to me, I believe absolutely that the Islamist philosophy that our government propounds is based on natural right, moral clarity, and exporting what is good in our culture. They would say just the same.
I think they would. I think that somebody from the clerical council in Tehran would probably tell you that their laws and their ideas were based on the Quran or on revealed Islamic doctrine. That's quite a different thing from natural right. That's believing in a divine dictation.
Well, it's different. I take your point, but it's not different in the sense that it's not something one can argue about. You either buy into it or you don't, just as one buys into your view of what is absolutely non-relatively right, or you don't. No, there it sits. It is your view, and you're not going to change it.
To believe in, to go along with what you say, there are two problems with it. Firstly, is actually, I don't think you would find an Islamic leader who said that that their version of the world was natural, right? They would say that they believed in the revealed philosophy of Islam.
As I said, you can make that point to me, but I come back to my bigger point, which is that just as you have a fundamental set of beliefs, so do they. And what we see is a clash of fundamental beliefs which are not open to discussion, compromise, or shades of grey. It's a recipe for eternal confrontation.
No, I don't think it is. The thing about this clash, which you say, I mean, it's the thing that's on a lot of people's lips. I don't believe in the clash of civilizations. I don't think it's happening. I don't think it need happen. The clash between what you call two different fundamentalisms, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that it's wrong to be, as it were, fundamentalist, as you'd say, about the ideal of democracy. I don't think it's fundamentalist to believe that all people across the globe should have a say in the way in which their countries are governed. I don't think it's fundamentalist. I don't think it's equally fundamentalist to say, if a mullah says and is fundamentalist about their right to rule people under a dictatorship, I don't think it's fundamentalist of me to say, actually, I think people should have a say in their future.
But of course, I just come back with Hardtalk from Russia. I've spoken to a lot of leading Russians who talk about democracy. Their use and meaning of the word is entirely different from that currently used in the United Kingdom. For them, it's democracy. So when you bandy around words like democracy, from the very beginning, you are into a very complex. It is not simple.
No, the Russians, of course, it's not simple. But the Russians that you're speaking to presumably have jumped onto the bandwagon, much like Russia has to some extent jumped on the notion of a war on terror to execute its own, I think, extraordinary and barbaric policy in Chechnya. There are people all over the world who will seize on what they consider to be the in-words of the moment and use them to excuse their own manner. There's no doubt about it that what Russia has and what some of the Russians you've been speaking to have been proposing is not democracy as we see it. Just because they use a word in a bad sense doesn't mean the word is printed.
All right, let's talk about Iraq, because if one is talking about the relevance of neoconservatism today, one cannot escape an important discussion about Iraq. Did Iraq, and has Iraq given you pause in your pursuit of neoconservatism?
Well, look, I'm not pursuing neoconservatism. I'm not trying to turn the world into neoconservatism.
Well, you sort of are pursuing it. You're trying to persuade. I mean, this book is trying to say, and indeed it says it on the cover, neoconservatism, why we need it.
I explain why, as a philosophy, I think it's the right way of looking at the world. I don't think that people are neocon. It's not like, I mean, people use the term neocon as if it's a sort of breed. I mean, it's just a way of looking at the world. It's an attitude, like some people have a liberal attitude.
Well, I say a mindset.
It's a mindset. It's a way of looking at it.
Let's agree on that.
So Iraq, look, I mean, when it comes to Iraq, first, I mean, the issue that you describe it as being a neoconservative war. If it actually was a neoconservative war, more so-called neoconservatives would have been involved. The highest any identifiable neocon came in the Bush administration was Paul Wolfowitz.
You described it as a perfect neoconservative war.
I'd say ideologically, absolutely. But it wasn't neoconservatives who drove the war or who ran the war or who run the aftermath of the war. So it's not a neoconservative run war, even if it's one that most neoconservatives were sympathetic to.
Indeed. I mean, you may dispute whether he's a neoconservative. He, for a time, appeared to sympathize with most tenets of neoconservatism. He's walked away from it. Francis Fukuyama, a respected American historian. He says, fundamentally, the neoconservatives got it wrong. The idea that freedom and democracy can be achieved by the use of hard power, he now says, is wrong.
Look, Fukuyama's not got much right in his career. And it's not surprising he's got this one wrong too. Look, first of all, Fukuyama, who always sees on by people as being the great example of somebody who's put up his hands and said, no, we were wrong. Actually, Fukuyama's general point now, if he has one, is that the tenets of neoconservatism has been misunderstood in the case of Iraq. I think that I think Fukuyama.
Forgive me, but having read what he's written about his current thinking, his key point is that the neoconservatives overestimated and misjudged the impulse and the effectiveness of military power.
Look, it's true that in the case of Iraq, some people, and you can always find somebody who does it, some neocons were more optimistic than perhaps they should have been about it. I think that Fukuyama is wrong, and is certainly contradicting a lot that he's said in other parts of his career.
Well, that's because he's learned from experience, surely.
I'm not sure he has. Look, Fukuyama's main belief in his first book, The End of History, talks about the idea, and it's an idea I hold as well, that the end of history, as it were, the final point society should get to, and ought to get to, and ought to be helped to get to, is one in which representative government, rule of law, and all these things exist in. And when you achieve that, then the struggles against totalitarianism and so on are over. There are other struggles, but that main one's over. I disagree with Fukuyama when he says that the use of force, or if he is saying, and he has come near it, the use of force is always going to lead to this problem. Look, the use of force was vital in overthrowing the totalitarianism that ruled Japan until 1945. It was force that was able to bring democracy in the end to Japan. You could have spent several more hundreds of years fighting some kind of war which was not involving hard power, but I think hard power there was necessary. I think hard power was necessary to bring democracy and accountability to Afghanistan. Is it perfect? Is it just only a democracy? Of course not.
Well,
but it's nearer that than it ever was going to be under the Taliban.
Patently not. Patently not. And I just wonder, both in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq, whether you, as a avowed neoconservative, want to say to people you're trying to persuade, look, Iraq and Afghanistan have been a success. Do you say that to people?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think there's much doubt that Afghanistan is a lot better than it was. There's a lot to be...
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you spend much time there, but
look,
on this program, we talk to people who are in Afghanistan, working for the UN, working for the military forces who are trying to stabilize Afghanistan, as well as the Karzai government. Nobody is telling me that the situation is getting better. Indeed, people are saying that it is getting worse and may well lead to utter chaos.
Look, there should be a collapse in Afghanistan. I don't doubt that for a moment, and the struggle there is big. But I would come back to saying that if you have the choice between dealing with a regime like the Taliban for 70, digging it in, treating it as if it's just any other regime, treating the vote in Afghanistan at the UN as equivalent to the vote of any democratic power like India, I think you end up in a bad position. I don't think that Afghanistan is anytime soon going to be a thriving economy. I don't think there are very easy answers. There might not be any answers to the problem of the Afghan economy. But that doesn't mean that Afghanistan in 2001 should have been allowed to just continue living in the Dark Ages under a government that imposed the Dark Age philosophy on its people, that had terror training camps where people could be sent around the world to commit acts of terror in other cities, in New York, Washington, and elsewhere. I don't think that was a viable alternative to the situation we have now.
So
the situation we have now...
The same sorts of terror camps are now in Iraq, which is a direct result of us having gone there.
Look, there were terrorists in Iraq before we went in there. Iraq was the home of international terrorism.
But not Al-Qaeda, you would agree?
No, not Al-Qaeda.
Fine. I want to turn, if I may, to consider, because we've talked a lot about American neoconservatism, American mindsets, but you want to make it relevant to Europe, this neoconservative idea. In Europe, it seems your message is that we're not just fighting enemies without, we're fighting enemies within. Is that fair?
Certainly. Yeah.
And who are these enemies within?
All sorts of people. I mean, there are people who, I intimated earlier about welfare spending and so on. I mean, there are a lot of people in Europe who have the attitude which is un-American, and so, yeah, it's a...
Which is a bad thing in your... to be un-American.
I'll explain why in a second. His attitude towards taxation is that, I mean, you don't hear in European elections, you don't hear people saying in American elections that you will relieve people from their tax burden, that you will slash taxes, because really people ought to be able to decide how they spend their own money. You don't really get that. Europe as a continent seems to me to be going the way where we believe that there are very few certainties in life. One of them, without doubt, is that we'll keep on paying more and more taxes, we'll pay more and more in welfare spending, it probably won't do much good, but we'll keep throwing money into it anyway. I think that this is a very hard thing to struggle against. It's very hard to persuade Europeans at the moment that the government is not there to make them happy, that the government cannot make them happy. Now, in America, you don't have a problem making that case. Lots of people make that case. It is very hard to persuade a European of that.
I find what you're saying fascinating, because you want to defend Western values, European values. That is absolutely the core of your belief system. And yet, when we start talking about Europe, you actually seem to despise a lot of what Europe has stood for the last 50 years. Europe has evolved since the Second World War in a very liberal, tolerant sort of way.
It's not to do with liberalism or tolerance. No, of course not. Never said it. This is not to do with liberalism or tolerance. This is simply liberalism. It is a situation where people have less control of their own money than they ought to have, in my opinion. They have ended up, as I say, as welfare brats across very large swathes of Europe. And as I say, you end up in this very difficult position where people are fixed on the fundamental mistake where they think that the government is there to make them happy or can make them happy. I don't believe it can. I don't think there's anything at all illiberal in believing that people should be freed from paying money to a state which cannot give them what they want.
Well, you've chosen to look at this debate about Europe so far in terms of welfare state. I would like you to address the role of Muslims in Europe, because, just to quote something which I may be misreading, but something you wrote not so long ago, Europe's half-century-long holiday from reality is over, you said. Europe has unsustainable demographic issues which, if unaddressed, will eradicate the continent as we know it in 3 or 4 generations. Yeah. Were you there partly pointing to the demographics that suggest the Muslim population of Europe is on the rise?
Yes, absolutely.
You see that as a fundamental danger to everything Europe stands for?
I think it's a danger when it happens too fast, which is happening, I think, at the moment, and a lot of people agree with this. I think of a country I spend a lot of time in, like Holland, for instance, where there are government statistics that suggest within just over a decade, the majority of people in Holland will be, as it were, non-Dutch. Now, you can say that there's something funny about pointing this out.
They won't be non-Dutch, will they? Because they will be Dutch citizens, and they will be the children of Dutch citizens, and they will be as Dutch as any other.
You do want to bet? Just go to Amsterdam or go to one of these cities and say, do you think that when you go into the mosque and you talk about issues which matter a lot to me, like gay rights, like women's rights, and all these things, do you think you will get as much of a hearing there, or do you think you will find it harder to? My suggestion on it, but the reason why I cite Holland is because in my opinion, very hard fought for rights, very hard fought for liberal rights, like equalities, like basic equalities like gay rights, are under threat, are undoubtedly under threat when you have too fast a population rising in that country that has not had time and will not, under the current demographic figures, have time to adapt to the Dutch way of life. Will Holland look more Dutch in the way we know it in 20 years' time, or will it look more Islamified? I think I know the answer.
In a nutshell, you're saying Europe has too many Muslims.
Well, I think at the moment the Muslims are not integrating fast enough into Europe.
Europe has too many Muslims.
I don't think that
well, look, feel free to say it.
Look, it wouldn't matter if there were too many Muslims, if they integrated. But very many of the figures we see show that they are not. In Britain, polls have showed, there was one just last year from Policy Exchange, showed that 40% of Muslims in Britain, for instance, wanted some elements of Sharia to be incorporated into British law. I think you find yourself in a very difficult position, if I may finish. You find yourself in a very difficult position when a swathe of whatever religion or whatever race, and after all this is actually about ideology, we're talking about an ideology in Islam, when people, when a substantial enough percentage of your population honestly believe that they should be ruled by a different rule of law from other people, that is a problem. It's going to be a bigger problem. It is going to be a growing problem.
You run something called the Centre for Social Cohesion. Does it aid social cohesion to essentially say, as you appear to agree with what I posited to you, that Europe, Britain, has too many Muslims? Is that really good for social cohesion, that sort of philosophy?
Look, there are two sides to this. One is what Muslims think and what they do in the West, and I don't have any doubt, and I've expressed it many, many times, that most Muslims are perfectly law-abiding people and so on. But
you sound as though you do have doubts. Reading some of the things you've written about terrorism in Islam, you clearly have doubts.
I have doubts about Islam as a philosophy, as an ideology.
Because you think Islam essentially, that terrorism is a natural product of Islam.
No, I don't think it's a natural product.
Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so
thank you. It's not a natural product of Islam necessarily, but there seems to me to be no doubt that that Muslim extremists and fundamentalists can find justification in Islamic texts for acts of terror. Now, fortunately, There are many other Muslims who explain to them that they shouldn't be going down that road, you don't have to interpret the text in that way. But if you ask me whether or not there are in Islamic texts justifications for terrorism, the answer to that is yes.
You see, when you talk like this, there are Islamic scholars, and I'm going to quote one at you, whom you know well and have debated many times, Tariq Ramadan, who accuse you of sweeping generalizations which tar an entire religion and an entire people in Europe with this brush of security risk, possible terrorism. And it's not fair, and it is deeply damaging to community relations across Europe.
Look, the thing that's deeply damaging to community relations is when people get on buses and blow people up, when they get on trains and blow people up,
and
when they blow up
Christians, atheists, and everybody else.
Because they hate the society. Because they hate the Muslims in society who integrate into part of the society as well. But if you ask me what the problem is, I know what the problem is. The problem is the people who do that. The problem are the people who want to hunt down people who say what they think about other people's ideologies, the people who don't mind killing filmmakers in the middle of the street in Amsterdam. That seems to me to be where the problem lies. Now, you can decide, you can decide that instead of there being a problem, anyone who identifies the issue is the problem. You can mix up the firefighter and the fire. You can mix up the actual problem with the people who are diagnosing and explaining the problem.
But Islam is not monolithic. I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely.
With that. I'm sure you would look at the initiatives in Turkey, for example, where the state is sponsoring a major reinterpretation of the Hadith, which some say could be as important as the Reformation in Christianity. Islam is evolving, changing, and developing all of the time in Europe. You, on the other hand, have this one monolithic view of how Islam is.
No, I don't. But look, just as you say quite rightly that Turkey, the attempt to reinterpret the Hadith is going on at the moment. We'll wait and hope that it's successful. It seems to me amazing that you would have to go to a religious text and have to explain or have to take out verses that say some of the things the Hadith say about, for instance, the role of women in society and their worth. But I hope that reformation you described can happen. And I'm not denying that it's possible or that it's going on. There are people working at it. But at the same time, there are places, and I would particularly cite Iran since 1979, there are cases which have shown, and have contradicted the liberal Western view of things, have shown that history can also turn backwards. But at the same time, you can get progress, you can have other Muslims who will be arguing more fundamentally. We'll wait and see who wins. We know that we have to back the reformers and the moderates, but we should not deny there are other people who are doing the opposite.
Almost out of time, but Norman Podhoretz, one of the intellectual founders of neoconservatism in America, says that we are locked in a fourth world war. Is it your contention for Europe that we in Europe are in a fourth world war?
In my opinion, we are in something like the opening stages of it. And there is now time to stop it. There is time by standing alongside those Muslims who are genuine reformers to stop their faith being continually hijacked by the people who are against reform. We know which side we have to be on. It has to be on that side. If we sort this out now, there will not be that war.
Douglas Murray, thanks very much for being on Hardtalk.
Thank you.